It's wonderful to have Riley here as a youth worship associate. He's a worship associate who is a youth, let's put it that way. And I remember that unfortunate haircut, Riley, that mullet. I'm looking forward to having your perspectives on Sunday mornings with us. Our reading this morning is a poem by William Stafford, and it may be kind of tricky to hear, so I'm going to read it through once, and if you'd like, I'll read it through a second time. And it also will be printed in, it'll be available in print form on our website on the sermon page. So I'm going to read this to you, and let me know. We'll check in afterwards to see if you want to hear it a second time. It's entitled, A Ritual to Read to Each Other. If you don't know the kind of person I am, and I don't know the kind of person you are, a pattern that others made may prevail in the world, and following the wrong God home, we may miss our star. For there is many a small betrayal in the mind, a shrug that lets the fragile sequence break, sending with shouts the horrible errors of childhood, storming out to play through the broken dike. And as elephants parade holding each elephant's tail, but if one wanders, the circus won't find the park. I call it cruel, and maybe the root of all cruelty, to know what occurs, but not recognize the fact. And so I appeal to a voice, to something shadowy, a remote, important region in all who talk. Though we could fool each other, we should consider, lest the parade of our mutual life get lost in the dark. For it is important that awake people be awake, or a breaking line may discourage them back to sleep. The signals we give, yes or no or maybe, should be clear. The darkness around us is deep. So would you like to hear that again? I see some nodding. We'll take the time to do that. If you don't know the kind of person I am, and I don't know the kind of person you are, a pattern that others made may prevail in the world, and following the wrong God home, we may miss our star. For there is many a small betrayal in the mind, a shrug that lets the fragile sequence break, sending with shouts the horrible errors of childhood, storming out to play through the broken dike. And as elephants parade holding each elephant's tail, but if one wanders, the circus won't find the park. I call it cruel, and maybe the root of all cruelty, to know what occurs, but not recognize the fact. And so I appeal to a voice, to something shadowy, a remote, important region in all who talk. Though we could fool each other, we should consider, lest the parade of our mutual life get lost in the dark. For it is important that awake people be awake, or a breaking line may discourage them back to sleep. The signals we give, yes or no or maybe, should be clear. The darkness around us is deep. These are the words of the poet William Stafford. Thank you, Dick. That's beautiful and so well played. It's unbelievable to me. I didn't do it very artfully in the first service, and the transition from Beethoven to my first remarks is not smooth, I'll tell you that. Because I'm going to talk to you about Home Depot. And I don't think those big box retailers existed back in that day. But I have something of a love-hate relationship with Home Depot. I know it's sometimes referred to as a Disney World for grown-up boys, and I can see why. You, and by you I mean you, me, and people across the gender spectrum who enjoy this sort of thing, can spend hours and hours wandering the aisles, looking at all the tools and the lumber and the paints and just dreaming about the incredible home improvement projects that you can engage in. That's the love part of the relationship. The hate part is that while Home Depot opens up this world of possibility to us, it can also make us, and by us I mean me specifically, feel incredibly incompetent. You see, I grew up learning to use my brain but not my hands. When a pipe would spring a leak in our house, my dad would pick up the phone and not pick up a wrench. So over the years, while I've learned a few things about home repair, one of the main things I've learned is how limited I am in my abilities. And those limitations are reinforced every time I walk into a Lowe's or a Home Depot. There are tons of items in these stores that just baffle me. I have no idea what they're for, how to use them, tools, just anything in there. And it leaves me sometimes feeling very incompetent and small. And then, of course, there's that frustration factor of looking for one specific item in this cavernous store. We've all been there, whether it's in Home Depot or some other big box retailer, wandering up and down the aisles, just looking for this one specific thing. After the first service, someone mentioned to me, you know how you get someone's attention in one of these stores? Climb a ladder. That's how you get customer service. So that's a good hint. But I made the mistake recently of going to Home Depot to get some glue. Seems simple enough. But do you know how many different kinds of glues they have at Home Depot? There are at least 50. I stopped counting at 50. There are glues that adhere wood to wood, metal to plastic. There are waterproof glues. There are glues that you should use in bright sunlight. There are glues that glue to other glue. And if you say glue enough times, it doesn't even sound like a word. So I brought with me a small sampling of the glues at Home Depot. So the first thing, of course, is the standard Elmer's glue. We all remember Elmer's glue from our school projects or with our kids, making paper chains or Mother's Day cards. Elmer's glue is a great starting point for just your basic glue. It says glue all, but it doesn't really glue all. And I don't know, does anybody know where Elmer or who Elmer is, where Elmer's glue came from? This is very interesting. Elmer is the bull who is the mate to Elsie the cow, because they're both made by Borden. Elmer's glue was made by Borden, of course since bought out by some big conglomerate. So we have Elmer's glue. Then let's see, the next thing we have is rubber cement. We all remember rubber cement. It smells so good. We love rubber cement. Then, let's see. Then there's this thing called Gorilla Glue, which is kind of misleading because it's not for gluing gorillas, apparently. It says it's for the toughest jobs on planet Earth, and Gorilla Glues, there are a bunch of Gorilla Glues. This one adheres basically things that are porous but hard to each other. Let's see. Oh, then there's epoxy. Now, epoxy, as you probably know, comes in two different substances that have to be kept apart until you're ready to use it. And then you mix them together, and one is a catalyst for the other, and it hardens, and you've got your bond. I have always been really afraid of epoxy, I have to tell you, because once you start that reaction, there's no stopping it, and you better be ready. So epoxy and I are not friends. And then, of course, we now have crazy glue. This is the glue that is now referred to as the medic's best friend. They actually are using crazy glue in the battlefield to close wounds. And if you've ever gotten some on your fingers and you got your fingers stuck together, you know how effective it is at getting skin stuck to skin. So crazy glue, of course, adheres almost instantaneously. So it's the perfect glue for our postmodern world where we need that instant gratification. So those are just a sampling of the glues that I came across in Home Depot. And probably by now you're wondering where I'm going with all of this. They say that for a minister there's a sermon in every experience. And I have to tell you that standing in the aisle, the glue aisle at Home Depot, I got inspiration for this sermon. What's fascinating to me about all these different kinds of glues is that they all have very specific purposes. They stick specific things or classes of things together in a specific way, forming a specific bond. And that got me thinking about church for some reason, and more specifically about Unitarian Universalist churches. And it led me to consider the question of what is the glue that holds us together? As members of a congregation, how do we form bonds with each other, and what keeps us sticking around, sticking with each other? In more traditional religious communities, it's easy to point to the glue that bonds people together. In Christian churches, it's their creed, their shared belief in one God taking the form of three persons, the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, the divinity of Jesus and the fact that he died for our sins. The creed defines who's in and who's out in a Christian church. In Jewish communities, it's largely the shared history and the rituals that have grown up around them that bind people together. The stories of Genesis and Exodus, the celebrations of Passover and the high holidays. For Muslims, the glue is the shared submission to God's will as revealed by the Prophet Muhammad in the Quran. Like a creed, their holy book provides Muslims with a common set of beliefs and practices. We, as Unitarian Universalists, don't have these things. We don't have a creed. We're not told what we have to believe to be here. We don't have a single holy book. For us, in a very real sense, all books are holy. And while we do have a shared sense of history, and we have a history, believe me, a history that dates back more than 500 years, it does lack both the depth and the breadth of tradition that is built around them that some of these other religions have. Since so many of us come to Unitarian Universalism within our own lifetime, we didn't grow up necessarily in this church, our history is something that we've learned, not something that we've lived out in our family of origin and that's been lived out for generation and generation. And because we lack these things, a creed, a shared history, a common book, a set of beliefs, I do sometimes worry that our stickiness can be like the glue that you find on the back of a Post-it note. It'll stick for a while, but it takes very little to get it unstuck. And when it peels away, there is nothing left. There's no evidence it was ever even there. I worry about that sometimes. What we need in our congregations, I think, is a glue that bonds materials that aren't necessarily alike. While we certainly share in a common humanity, we come to our Unitarian Universalist congregations with different understandings and expectations. We're on different paths, both spiritually and personally. And what that means is we need a glue that can hold us together while at the same time maintaining our separate identities, while we celebrate our differences. In some ways, I suppose our differences themselves have the potential to bond us, sort of like the epoxy that I'm so afraid of. When we come together and celebrate our diversity, when we share parts of ourselves and learn from each other, we can serve as catalysts to each other. We can serve as catalysts for our own spiritual transformation and for the transformation of others. Through shared learning and growth, we can develop bonds that are lasting and strong. And this is perhaps what we talk about when sometimes we refer to our unity in diversity in our congregations. But I'm still not sure that's enough. Epoxy forms a very strong bond, but it's a hard bond. It's sometimes even brittle. And what epoxy doesn't lend itself to being in a fluid, sort of changing environment and situation. So what we need within our congregations is a bond that holds us tightly together, but also allows flexibility. Something that calls us each to the table and keeps us there, but which also provides us with room to change and grow. Something that honors our independence as well as our interdependence. Something like rubber cement. Recall that when you use rubber cement, you have to apply it to both surfaces that you're going to stick together. So both sides need to bring something to the party. They're treated as equals. Both sides are treated the same. And when properly applied, rubber cement forms a strong, lasting bond, but it's also pliable, it's flexible. It allows for subtle movements and changes between the different surfaces. And it smells so good. So then the question is, what serves as our rubber cement? And I would submit to you that there is only one thing that can and that will hold us together tightly, but with flexibility. And that thing is covenant. Covenant. You've heard us perhaps referred to as a covenantal community. Now, the word covenant is kind of just a fancy word for promise, so you can interchange those two in your own mind as I go on here. But the promises that we make, the covenant we make with each other, these are the things that hold us together. Simply put, our word is our bond. Our word is our bond. The Unitarian theologian James Luther Adams has rightly pointed out that, quote, the first characteristic of human collective existence is commitment. That is, making an agreement, a promise. Promising is a characteristic feature of meaningful human existence, he writes. So what Adams is saying here is that all our relationships are based on and created out of the commitments that we make to each other. And they may be explicit or they may be implicit, but we make them through our promises. So what does it mean to be in covenant with each other? What are the promises that we make to each other, that we try to keep with each other here in our congregation and in all Unitarian Universalist congregations? And we make all sorts of promises. There are all sorts of covenants. In fact, we have in our hymnal, right in front, what we refer to commonly as our 7 principles. You don't need to get this out now, but sometime you may want to look at it. But these are a covenant that we as Unitarian Universalist congregations make with one another and we make to ourselves. We covenant to affirm and promote the inherent worth and dignity of every person, etc., etc. There are 7 principles that you can find here in our hymnal. But I would say that while there are 7 principles, there are really at its core, at our core, 3 covenants that we make with each other. 3 promises. First, as Unitarian Universalists, we promise to love each other. We promise to love each other. The second is that we promise to grow together. And the third promise is that we will work together for justice. We will love each other, we will grow together, we will work together for justice. A few years ago, we were developing our mission covenant statement. It's a statement that's printed every single week on the inside of your order of service, if you ever want to read it. When we were doing that, and we were trying to distill a lot of data we had gathered from various people in the congregation, someone said to me, "Isn't what we do just 3 things? We care, share, and repair." We care, share, and repair. I just think that captures it. That's our essence. And I think about what a great t-shirt that would make. So let me unpack these 3 promises for a few minutes. When I say that we as Unitarian Universalists promise to love each other, I mean that we are committed to making the effort to get to know one another, and more importantly, to finding the good in each other. That while we recognize, affirm, and celebrate our differences, we don't let our differences divide us. In fact, just the opposite. We treasure our differences. Our promise to love each other also means that we are committed to giving each other the benefit of the doubt. Because we will disagree. Inevitably, we will disagree because we aren't all the same and we don't all believe the same. No one expects us to like each other all the time. Yes, we will love each other, but we don't need necessarily to be in constant agreement. As members of this congregation and of our Unitarian Universalist faith, we promise to respect each other and to trust each other. Our promise to love means that we are committed to being in a relationship of equals, interacting with each other in a meaningful and mutually supportive way. It means that while we maintain our individuality, we don't act individualistically. Now, you know the difference between being an individual and acting individualistically. We maintain our own identities, but we don't act out of our own self-interest. That's what I mean. Much like a marriage, we recognize that while there is a you and there is a me, we are committed to the larger we that we are forming, we are creating together. It's that commitment to the we that our love is all about. Our second promise, or covenant, is the promise to grow together. As Unitarian Universalists, we come to church to be changed, to be transformed. Ours is a come-as-you-are community. You are welcome as you are, but we're not a stay-as-you-are faith. We expect that you will grow and change and be transformed, that we all will seek out new perspectives, new experiences, new mountaintop moments where our eyes are open to new ways of seeing and new ways of being. We are seekers more than believers, doubters more than knowers. The promise we make to each other is to share this journey that we're on, to support one another, to encourage and embolden each other. Embolden and encourage each other on the journey. We acknowledge that each of us has gifts to share, and we share them freely with each other and with our community. We also are free to admit our own ignorance and our limitations. And we know that those limitations can be complemented by others in our community, so that we can feed each other's hunger for spiritual growth. The third promise is that we make when we come here is to work together for justice. Our church is a place of belonging. I hope when you walk in the doors, from the first moment, you feel welcome. You feel that this is a place that you can belong to, a place of people with common interests and shared values. It's a place where we can come to feel good and to be fed. Absolutely. We want to be inspired. We want to receive the blessings that love and shared longings offer to us here. But belonging to a Unitarian Universalist congregation isn't all about us. It's not all about us. Because we know that we aren't just individuals, that we are related. We're interrelated to others. Because the interdependent web that we talk about sometimes isn't just a pretty image that we use to remind us to reduce, reuse, and recycle. Because our relationship with others doesn't stop at the doors to this sanctuary or the end of our driveway. Because of all these things, we promise, we covenant to participate in the creation of just relationships beyond those that we have here among us. We covenant to work to end oppression and poverty and injustice, however we might be called to do that. It doesn't matter whether you are passionate about restaurant workers' rights or gun control or money in politics or the war on women. Whatever injustice sparks your passion, as Unitarian Universalists, we are called to work toward creating a just and sustainable world. That is a covenant that we make with ourselves, with each other, with people beyond our community, and with that greater mystery that some of us choose to call God. So, as Unitarian Universalists, we covenant to love, care for, and be compassionate toward each other. We covenant to support each other on our spiritual journeys, and we covenant to work for justice. These shared promises are the glue that holds us together. And before I close, I want to just say one more thing about covenants, about promises. Because we need to make these promises between ourselves and among ourselves. But we also have to recognize our own limitations as individuals, as people, as imperfect people. Because we will inevitably break our vows. We will break our covenant. We will break our promises that we make to ourselves and to one another. It may happen intentionally, it may happen inadvertently, but it will happen. The theologian Martin Buber wrote that we are not just promise-making and promise-keeping people, but that we are also promise-breaking and promise-renewing people. So in making our promises to each other, in the act of creating and living out our covenant, we have to acknowledge that our imperfections are going to lead us to a situation where the covenant is broken. So one of the promises we make to each other is, as I said earlier, to stay at the table amidst our differences, even when a covenant is broken, even when we disappoint each other. Part of being a covenantal community is setting expectations that may seem beyond our grasp and failing to reach them. And then, when we fail to reach them, to recommit ourselves, to re-covenant, to re-promise once again. Friends, I am ever so grateful to be part of this covenantal community with you, to be in covenant with each of you, to make these mutual commitments to each other that will love each other, that will grow together, that will work for a better world together. These things, these promises, these covenants have the power to bind us together in religious community and to prepare us for the sacred work that we are called to do. This day and every day, I wish you peace. Amen.